Welcome to our London TravelWatch public board this morning, and a warm welcome to anybody who is joining us on our YouTube channel. It's really great to have you with us this morning. We've got a lot of interesting things to cover in quite a short period of time this morning. Let me just start off by giving one or two apologies from our board this morning. So unfortunately, we don't have Karen MacArthur with us this morning. We do have Priya Kular, but she'll be joining us in about 30 minutes. Otherwise, we've got a full set of board members. We're also very lucky this morning that we're joined by, with different points in the morning, by three of our board members designate. So warm welcome to Rick Hebditch and Eddie Lynch, who are in the meeting at the moment. It's really great that you're able to join us while we're waiting for your appointments to be confirmed by the Transport Secretary. And we're also going to be joined a bit later on by Lara Sonola, who's our third incoming board member, who's just going to come virtually to introduce herself to you and the rest of the board. That's it by way of introductions. So what we're going to be doing together over the next couple of hours. So we've got really three big agenda items for this morning. The first is we're going to have a portfolio, I think what you could call a portfolio item, which we've titled Business Plan Delivery. But actually this wraps up quite a lot of different things. So we've got a couple of documents on our business plan, giving us an update on what we've been doing on the various strands of our plan. We're sharing with you our time tracker, which shows what our key deliverables are going to be over the year. And then a couple more detailed agenda items. So first, following up a really good discussion we had at our last board on what are we going to do with some bus research that we commissioned. So this might be a bit tricky for new joiners, but this is essentially a follow-up to a conversation that we had at our last board. And then we've shared a paper on progress with delivering the Mayor's transport strategy, which I think we thought would be of interest to everybody, but particularly for new joiners. It's quite a good point of entry to understanding what's going on in London right now, what's the data telling us about what's doing well, and where further action needs to be taken to deliver some quite ambitious targets. So we'll pick up all of those things under business plan delivery. Then we're going to have our regular reports pen section on casework, campaigns, comms, finance. And then finally, before Lara joined us, it's another follow-up item. So we've been doing some work on our stakeholder mapping as an organisation. We had a discussion of this, I think, 2 meetings ago. And Advocacy is going to give us an update on what we've done since then. So that's us between now and 1 o'clock. Shall I just draw breath and check before getting into that has anybody got any other business they're going to want to do, or anything else that we should be covering this morning? No, that's excellent. All right, well then let's get into our business plan update. And as I said, we've got a number of papers to cover under this agenda item, but let's start with the first two, which is LTW 747 and LTW 748. And I might just take a little bit of a step back before we get into the discussion on these papers, mainly for the benefit of the new joiners, because you are, I think it's inevitable when you come new onto a board that you're kind of coming to some conversations halfway through, and it might be helpful just to reflect on how we got to the priorities that we've set for the organisation over this year. And I think you've already had a chance to look at the more detailed business planning product that sits behind them. And I'll start, but Michael, I'm encouraging you to pitch in again, as ever, if I miss anything. So we were invited by the London Assembly in December last year to propose a work plan for London TravelWatch for the next financial year. And Michael and I and Arthur, my predecessor in this role, gave evidence to the Assembly back in December on the areas which are going to be our priority activities in our work plan. I mean, a couple of guiding principles that helped us get to that work plan. First, we wanted to get the right balance between continuing things which were long-term priorities for people who travel in London. So there are going to be some issues on our agenda which are always going to be things that we want to be focusing resource on, including inclusion, system performance. There are caseworking where we're always going to want to do a good job whatever year we're in. But we also wanted to find a bit of capacity to think about hot topics, things that are shaping the future of transport as well as the transport experience people are having today. So our work programme very much is a mix of continuing priorities and some new stuff as well. The second thing was we were very keen not to map out the whole year right from the very beginning, because stuff happens. And we wanted to make sure we had a little bit of capacity in the team where some of the stuff that is changing through the year, we've got the time and the headspace to respond to that. So our business plan has a little bit of some stuff happens capacity in it as well. So looking at those principles that brought us to the priorities that I set on our work programme, and those were endorsed by the Assembly in December and have been worked up into the more detailed planning document that we're reporting on today. That was all I was going to say by way of context. Michael, is there anything that you wanted to add to that before we get into the discussion?
Just again, by way of explanation, the 8 priority themes that we set out in the plan, which you rightly explained, Tricia, doesn't necessarily cover everything that we deal with because stuff happens and we need to allow a little bit of space for those things. For each of those 8 themes, internally, we have a more detailed project plan on a couple of sides, which is a classic set of descriptors around deliverables, objectives, desired outcomes, a RACI table, assigning accountability, etc. And in the paperwork in front of the board today, what we've done is rather than bombard you with all of that paperwork, is we've tried to give you on a page a kind of statement of where we are on each of those 8 themes, and also to provide you with a forward look over the course of the business year as to what the activity, it's basically a visual summary of the project plans as to what you could expect us to be doing over the course of the year on each of those. And it's really an invitation to the board to exercise your project management challenge and support function before we get into a little bit of the creativity and intellectual stuff around, for example, the bus report, which I'm sure Alex and Trevor will talk to.
Great, thank you. So, assuming that you've had a chance to look at the summary documents 747 and 748, is this just checking this is the kind of information that you find useful, and then very happy to pick up any questions or comments on what's it telling you about what we've done so far this year, and then also the timeline for delivery over the rest of the year. Would it be helpful if I suggested that was a very hard question, wasn't it? Would it be helpful if I maybe suggested a couple of areas where Alex might want to just give us a sense of how things have evolved? Maybe the work on the definition of the accessibility priority, and then the preparations for the personal security summit would be good examples of things that we're working on particularly actively right now.
Yeah, sounds good. So the first, as Tricia mentioned, is around priority number 2, which is around more accessible transport. So you might remember from the first iteration of this, we had quite a few different projects in there that were related, but a little bit bits and pieces. So Michael and I have been thinking about that strand, basically how we can streamline it, make the bits of work that we're doing more effective, and also kind of make the most of the sort of relatively limited resource that we've got as an organisation. So we've now streamlined it into 2 strands. So one is more focusing on national rail services, and that includes things, for example, the plan improvements that came out of the ticket office consultations last year, and keeping that on track. TfT have also been doing an audit of rail stations, which we expect to do shortly. So kind of any results from that, any actions that we want from that. And then the other side to that is TfL, obviously a huge operator in our patch. So again, just looking at kind of accessibility initiatives and how they can improve their network. within that. So that's, I think, a little bit further back, but as people may have seen, they published their equity emotion strategy earlier this year. So I think really good opportunity to kind of help build on that and shape that and make sure that it's really delivering for passengers. So that's kind of the broader things. There is also a mini strand, I'm calling it, which is the mentoring scheme, which came out of the conversations around Alan Benson's legacy. So we're picking that up as well within that priority, but obviously it sits a little bit separately to that. So now we've got those and kind of playing on with that, but it's shaped a bit differently to how we originally presented it. So I don't know if anyone's any thoughts or questions on that.
While people are thinking, you might just be worth reflecting that this is what the Assembly is going to be focusing on in the autumn as well. So it's a good opportunity for us to make sure that what we do adds value to what they do. Laura.
You might have this covered already, Alex, but I saw that TfL are advertising for new board members. And I was just wondering if we have an opportunity as part of their induction to share our perspective on some of this so that they sort of hit the ground running on the accessibility side in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. See if we can raise that. I think that also might be the same, but advertising for new IDAG members. So I think that's another kind of opportunity to kind of look at what they do around accessibility.
It's a really good idea, Laura. It's a really good idea. I'm not sure how far they've got on the board member recruitment. I've had a couple of phone calls from candidates, but I don't know how far they've got through the process. Be a good idea to make friends with them. Agree. Any other questions on the accessibility work strand? Rick?
Yeah, I was interested in the reasons why you were separating out TfL and national rail, just because it tends to be quite different issues or different approaches from them.
Yeah, probably the latter. So I mean, obviously a lot of the issues are the same across the network, but their approaches are different. So for example, a lot of the stuff around the ticket office consultations and work from that, a lot of those issues are a bit specific to national rail. Obviously TfL services have generally got the zonal system and tap in and tap out all the cards, whereas National Welfare Network using ticket machines is kind of raises a whole bunch of different issues. So kind of looking at that, but also just operationally, TfL obviously cover a lot of services, but it's one operator, they've kind of got their own work that they do, and then National, I guess, they're separate. I mean, obviously, I think we're trying to kind of get links where we can between them, because I think there's a lot of ways that they can learn from each other. So, for example, I mentioned the DFT are doing their audit of station accessibility. TfL actually in the equity emotion strategy want to do something similar at their station, so it's kind of can we link them up, share any learnings from that so they don't make the same mistakes or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think operationally they're separate, but I mean we are, you know, don't want to keep them in silos or anything like that.
I was just going to ask about the stakeholders. In the paper, you've got 2 stakeholders as examples. The potential is endless. How do you define them? How do you determine who you're going to engage with?
Very good question. The 2 that I've included in this document is just because they're specific to a couple of those conversations. I think I'll come on to this a little bit later in the stakeholder mapping agenda item as well. I think we're very keen to kind of work with other organisations. For example, as well with accessibility, we have some knowledge of it, and you know, we get it through our casework and things like that, but also very much aware that we are not kind of experts on that. So very keen to work with organisations who do have more expertise, and engage with them and work with them and kind of learn from them as well. So very much it is wider. There are a few other organisations who work with, Transport for All, for example, work quite closely with them and have a good relationship with them. They're who we're working with on the mentoring scheme, for example. But yeah, very open kind of other thoughts as well on that. As you say, there are a lot of organisations out there.
Thank you. Anything else on the accessibility work? I mean, I think this is just a little bit of a taster for a longer conversation about the structure that Alex has just walked us through, but it's a good example of where thinking about the work programme has been refined since the last time we met. And then Alex, just a quick update on the Personal Security Summit, because that's been a big interest to lots of the existing board members.
Yes, so as a bit of background, personal security is something we started working on 2-3 years ago, I think, roughly, or as a big campaign. And then we've been doing a lot of work on that, kind of looking at it more holistically, but also going into kind of impacts of different demographics, and different ways it impacts people and different sort of recommendations, different modes. And we've had a lot of really productive conversations with that. Our most recent report was towards the end of last year, and that was specifically looking at the LGBTQ plus community and their experiences. But again, I guess it's just taking it to the next step. We had a lot of, warm words from transport operators, which is great, but we need to turn that into action. And there's definitely different levels of interest and willing, shall we say, from different operators on this. So we've been working with TfL on this and are looking to arrange a personal security summit. As Tricia said earlier, everyone loves a summit.
Love a summit.
Yeah. Just to bring everyone together. Hopefully boost it up the agenda of people where it's kind of a bit further down, but also share a lot of learnings. I think a common theme we've had in our conversations with different operators is that even where they want to do something, they don't necessarily know how to. So kind of just sharing best practice and building that all together. Where are the barriers? Again, how can industry collectively kind of address the issues? Because, they might have their own things on each network, but, passengers don't necessarily know the difference between them. They don't care if they're traveling on Greater Anglia or C2C, they're just, I'm getting off the train. So basically making sure it's as consistent as we can, and then everyone's working together, essentially. So that should be in October. There's been quite a lot of high level interest. I know the Assembly mentioned they're interested in it. I think TfL has quite some senior interest as well. So hopefully we're sending those invites out soon.
I think great for board members to be involved. I think it'd be a really good opportunity for kind of a bit of representational work from board members, and because this is such an important strand of our work, really important, and it was one of the most impactful things that was done last year. So it'd be great to give people a chance to be part of that. Thank you.
Just a question. Have you given thought to how the summit is going to be structured, given that you're not necessarily presenting report again as how much these structures be like?
Yeah, so we're working that through at the moment. I think we're keen to kind of have, obviously share some of the research that we've done and those findings, but I think we're also keen to kind of not just be us kind of preaching to people, get other people to share kind of work that they've done. I think we're also really keen to have people with lived experience come along and kind of share their experiences, what works for them, what hasn't, those sorts of things. And then also just making sure that there are actually conversations happening. So again, can we have that discussion? Can we kind of get the best kind of thoughts from everyone and then get commitments to kind of take that on after the day as well? We don't want, no matter how good the day is, if it's just that day and nothing comes out of it. But yes, again, very open.
Right, thank you. Okay, unless somebody's got anything burning on the business plan generally, I'm going to suggest we use the rest of the time to come on to the two more detailed papers. So the first is, and Trevor has joined us. Trevor, great to see you. You might just introduce, we didn't mention your name earlier on, but you might just want to start by introducing yourself, particularly for the benefit of new board members. But Trevor is here to join us for the discussion on what are we going to do with a really interesting piece of research that the board discussed at its last meeting around how can we encourage more people to use buses in London, and what are the attitudes of people who are using buses in London, what are their priorities, what's important to them. What in our last meeting, as you might have seen for the minutes, we were really absorbed what our suppliers and what the team had told us, but we were keen that we take that away and think about what are we going to do with all this insight and how we're going to translate it into a call to action and a set of proposals, and that's what we've come back to do today. So I don't know whether Alex or Trevor, you're going to pitch this.
I can pitch it. I mean, Trevor, feel free to jump in.
Yeah,
if I can say anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Tricia mentioned, so at the last board meeting, I had a session where Yonder, who we work with to do the research, came and presented the findings and had what I found a useful discussion with the board. So thank you as well for your thoughts on that. Since then, we've taken that away, kind of thinking about how that again kind of shapes the narrative in the report and the kind of what do we want out of it. So that's the document that's kind of been attached, which I won't go through in detail, but just kind of looking through the narrative of the story that we're going to say. But we've also been supplementing that with Trevor's been doing lots of really great external data analysis, looking at other sources. Obviously, what passengers think is extremely important, but it's only part of the picture, kind of how is everything working on the ground. So looking at that to increase the robustness, build a picture of what's working, and also kind of at a London level, but also kind of between boroughs. We've also been talking to boroughs, so we've had some early conversations. The pre-election period has obviously slightly got in the way of some of these conversations, but picking them up again because I think it's about 95% of London's roads are in borough control, so they're a really important part of this. It's not just TfL. And on that note, TfL have also announced that the new round of LIP funding, so local implementation plan funding, which boroughs can apply for the next 3 years, so that will kick in next spring, is opening, and as part of that there is a dedicated bus priority fund, which is something we really keen to kind of for boroughs to apply for and make the most of. So we'll be building that into this, and hopefully when this is published, also kind of using this to again help shape those plans. We've also rebooted the bus alliance. That implies it's gone away. It's not going away, but just again after all the pre-election periods that have kind of propped up having them. So there's been a lot of really interest from all of those different members. So I should say, for context, Bus Alliance, group of different organisations who are interested in the bus, kind of does what it says in the tin, and working together. So it's things like Bus Usage UK, Healthy Streets, Scorecards, ourselves. We've got some assembly members that come along, London councils, a few borough representatives as well. So a lot of really good insight there. And I think they're very keen to kind of jump on board with this, help push this, sort of some of the asks, and again shared some useful intel for us as well. But yeah, so we've pulled that all together and about to start drafting this. The aim to have it published for Catch the Bus Month, which is in September. So various things going on then, and again that would be hopefully good timing for slip funding conversations, plans for sort of financial years, and also after that summer holidays. So hopefully everyone will be back and well rested, ready to boost bus priority. It's Trevor, I don't know if I've missed anything. Or...
No, I think it's everything. Thank you. That's summed everything up.
Nice one. And thank you very much, Trevor, because this has moved on a lot since we last got this as a board in the last month. And it definitely feels this could be something really impactful. So I'm really impressed by how you brought in all this other information and looked at all these other resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And the conversation really did help last time to kind of get a bigger context. So thank you to the board for their help with that.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I hope while you're all planning your own personal journeys for Catch the Bus Month in September, and Laura, just because you won't be on the board anymore doesn't mean you don't have to participate. I'd be really interested in your reflections on the summary report that we've circulated. I think in particular, the challenge that the board raised last time about how do we make an impact with this work? How do we actually drive practical change on the ground? Do you think that what Trevor and Alex has pulled together takes us in that direction? Which bits of it really sing to you? Where else would you suggest that we need to take it before it can have the impact we want? So I'm really, really grateful to have your reflections and your feedback. Laura.
Thanks, Trisha, and thanks, Alex and Trevor. Apologies, I missed the last board meeting, so I hope I'm not going to repeat anything that was said before. But I was just interested in your minds. If we were really going to focus all of our results and efforts on trying to change one thing, what do you now think it would be? Because I think there's lots in the paper that does need to happen. I guess the thing that was slightly less clear to me still is what specifically can and will we do about it? What's the most important role we can play in driving that shift? So yeah, just interested in your take on where that's headed.
Trevor, I'll let you.
Trevor, I think you should answer that question, and then it's a really good question, a really tough question as well, unsurprisingly, Laura. But what do you think?
Sorry, it's my last meeting. I've got to I've got to keep going.
I mean, I think the average speed is the kind of almost like the bedrock issue that everything else kind of feeds around that, and that is something that is kind of obviously within TfL's control, but also within the boroughs, as well, if they can get working well with TfL, with other boroughs through London councils, and kind of really kind of push on with bus priority. We know TfL have got their 25 kilometres by 2025. Obviously, there's so much more than just bus lanes, and sometimes there's a concern that people think bus priority is just bus lanes, but things like smaller things, bus gates, signal retiming. So it's almost pushing that message for those boroughs that are doing good work, the TfL work with, and how we can kind of get involved in that conversation to say, well, these are the good boroughs, to try these things. You may not be aware of some of these things, just to kind of help promoting that, because there's so much good work that are going around London, but some boroughs may not be aware of that, and we want to be able to give all the different options away as kind of an honest broker. I think would be a good way of doing that.
Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, great piece of work and a really good extension on from our discussion last time. I suppose that the question for me is, with everything that you've looked at, was there any particular areas that you felt that you couldn't get any insight into or further understanding on? And then the second part is there any further work that you hope to continue to do that you'll share with us in due course, or do you feel now that you've given us that more total picture?
I'm going to ask Trevor again.
We are kind of we've still got some questions out with TfL just about some of the other things, about some of the differences in boroughs, what's happening there, some of the bus priority kind of funding and what bus priority is in already, just to get a sense of kind of how much is happening, some of those extra things. And the other thing is kind of, as Alex mentioned, just getting more of a kind of contact with some of the boroughs. So we are proposing to do a kind of a short survey with each of the boroughs, kind of the portfolio holders, just to get a sense of how they think the relationship is working with the TfL and other boroughs and other kind of organisations, of what do they think about how things are generally with the bus, and perhaps also how we can help. We know a couple of those conversations we had with boroughs previously, they mentioned about perhaps kind of a guidance note about about bus priority and other ways that we can help, just using good practice, so we could kind of almost collate something like that on behalf of the boroughs and they can share that. So that's that is kind of one of those approaches. I think, yeah, with the boroughs, because there's a scale of a number of boroughs, it has been more difficult for us to kind of get engagement with that, but we're hoping that will be for the report, but also longer term as well. We can build up some of those relationships. We have some, but to get more, that can then help, and hopefully we can then feed that back through to TfL as well as London councils with the overarching role. We can also kind of help that relationship as well. We know it has been difficult in some parts of London over the last couple of years, so hopefully we can help with that as well, feeding back both ways.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Really good. I've got a follow-up question on the back of that, but I'm keen to hear from other people. Tiffany.
Thanks for the bus report summary. It's yeah, I see the progress from last time when we met until this, and that's really positive. And I think point 7, yeah, about local government and the role they've improving the bus network was the most important, or kind of the key takeaway from this document. And it seems like it raises broader and thornier questions around transport governance in London, because it's not only an issue with bus network, it's an issue with walking and cycling and other non-transport issues. So I guess it seems like there's an opportunity to have a broader discussion about local governance in London and how we improve that, but also we do need to keep the scope quite focused. So I guess how much do we want to push in terms of having this conversation? Do we limit it to buses, or buses and walking and cycling, or yeah, just what is the scope? Because in terms of making this research more relevant, I think that governance point touches on so many other key issues with a new mayor, or well, with states, there were final term and new government. It seems like these are going to be quite topical issues, but at the same time, we do have limited resources and can't go all over the place.
That's a big question you just posed. And I'm really pleased to see that Michael is going to have a go at answering it.
It was actually another point.
Oh, okay, all right. Oh, okay. Well, I'll come back to you in a moment then. So there is so the question, I think, is a really good one. So our work on buses takes the fact that 95% of roads in London are managed by boroughs as a given. and says, against that background, what is it that we can do to make this work better, whether that's working with individual boroughs or technology, whatever. I think your challenge is, should we be taking that as a given? Or is there a case for London TravelWatch having an opinion, or having a view that transport, not just buses, might work better with a different governance framework? Right. It's a really, really good question. Interested in what people think about it. People have put their head down. It's like, I'm seeing the eyes in the room dropping.
John.
Go on then. I think we should ask a designated board member for a view on that. Go, Rick.
So I'm not sure quite answers it, but the things I was also interested in is how much in London we actively manage the street network as well. So when things go wrong, is there an attempt to try and solve them? So I think in some other cities, from memory, then there was more active managing of streets when there was going in congestion. And there was also, the question I had was also about how much we're relying on bus priority to solve the issues around bus speed, and how much that can always answer that problem. So if you've got overall congestion levels continually rising, it's not going to make much difference. Well, it's going to make a difference if you have more bus priority, but you can't solve the issues around some streets where there is a lack of space to put in bus priority matches. So I wondered whether it was worth making points about how overall TfL is managing congestion and trying to reduce the number of car journeys as well, which kind of strays slightly, I guess, beyond the TravelWatch's core agenda, but it is impacting on making the bus viable for what then it probably is worth thinking about as well.
I think that one is for you, Alex.
No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think my initial thought is, just for the purposes of the report, keeping it fairly focused on the bus, but I think that can kind of hopefully serve as a sort of best practice. Like, if you can do it here, you can do it in other areas. So that was specifically around sort of governance and working with TfL as far as and there are other members of the Bus Alliance who are very much looking at it across sort of active travel modes and sort of holistically. So I think there's a space for us to work with them as well around this. I mean, I think the congestion is a very good question. I think also there's some bus priority measures that I think often, and I know I used to think this as well, I'm not saying that you do, but like when you think of bus priority, you kind of think, oh, the big shiny bus lane, which is great, but there are other kind of smaller things that you can do around traffic light signaling and all that sort of stuff. So I guess it's widening it for that, but also I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I think you got there. I think you got there.
No, there was something else that I think it's quite good, but we'll never know. But no, I think it's a very good question.
Yeah.
And I think something that we can kind of have a think about how to still be impactful in this bit of work, but then maybe look at it more widely, just in terms of resource wise.
So I think we should come back. So there's two different questions there. I think the question around demand management or is something we'll pick up, I think, in the next agenda item on the Mayor's transport strategy. That you've got that question around how you're going to achieve the modal share target. So I think let's park that one for the moment. I think on Tiffany's big challenge, I think we should. I think we should kind of take that away and have a bit of a think about it, because I think there's a question of if I know that there's legislation planned on the future of sub-regional governance outside London. And it'd be interesting to see what sort of powers and duties that gives non-London mayors in other cities, and then maybe some interesting read across to what happens in London from that. And it may be that if we're unsuccessful in the conversations that Alex was talking about with individual boroughs, that we have to think, so if we can't do this in a consensual way, what happens next? So I think it's a really good challenge. But let's take it away and have a bit of a think about it.
I think it's sort of just briefly on your point as well. I think it's something that the Assembly are kind of interested in as well. So I think around sort of road space and reduce how we do that is something they're looking at. So I think need to look at sort of the wider point as well in the future, I think.
Thank you. Michael, something good?
Thank you. So just reflecting on those two suggestions from Tiffany and from Rick. I mean, my proposition would be, let's bank where we've got to so far by refining and properly drafting the report. But the two areas that have been highlighted, one around, as it were, governance, the other around, what actually might unlock changes in bus speeds other than priority measures. I think they're good topics for ongoing conversation once we've got the report kind of done. They're the kind of they're stage two. The report identified X, Y, Z. There are a number of questions amongst other things. Here are a couple, and I think they're worth pursuing with others, whether it's the authorities in aggregate or TfL or indeed other players who've got expertise in this field. It kind of morphs a little bit into the reason I put my hand up, which riffed off Susan's question. And one of the things that the Yonder research highlighted, which we referred to in the summary, is the fact that there is this 20% of bus users who claim to be neither satisfied nor dissatisfied with the quality of service. And our instinct is that, well, is there something, it might not take much to push them into, actually, I'm really satisfied. And if you could get some insight into what is that thing and what is it about that 20%, if anything, which suggests how you might target interventions to switch them to being satisfied and therefore, by extension, encouraging to make that extra journey a week by bus that they're not making at the moment. That's an area that we haven't been able to mine further because the sample size isn't really big enough to kind of carry the weight of that analysis. But that would be potentially something, budgets willing and time willing, that would be worth pursuing, or for us to suggest in conversation with TfL that they should really get to understand better, or indeed for them to reply and say, no, really, that's a dead end alley. There's no point in going down that route. But that would be a kind of next step bit of work that one way or another it would be good to bottom out, but which I think at the moment the analysis wouldn't bear the weight of further development.
I agree, but the analysis is good enough for us to have identified the right question.
Yeah.
I think what the research has really helpfully done is point at that 20% as being our target audience without necessarily definitively giving us the answer to what it's going to shift,
right.
We're going to do to shift their behavior. So that does feel like a really good asset to take into the conversation. Any other reflections on the buses document? Susan?
Just about the governance. TfL are floating the idea at the moment of taking control of the buses back in house, so that could change how they're managed. It might be that they're just hopefully managed better, rather than individual routes operating individually. So yeah, that could bring about change, or the TfL may have to be able to do more with interchange as well between routes.
So more control. Yeah. Thank you. Eddie?
Yeah. I thought it was a really great report, and thank you very much. Really, really interesting. I suppose one of the things that struck me around improvements was that there was no mention about training for bus drivers and the other staff as well. And I just wonder if that came through at all in the report, if there's any scope to include that. I'm just thinking about improving the whole customer experience and encouraging vulnerable groups who don't have the confidence to use buses. I ask that not knowing what mandatory training is already included for bus drivers and other staff.
It's a fantastic question. Alex?
Yeah, so I don't think it's something, Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong, that came up hugely through this bit of research, but it is, as you mentioned, definitely something that is really important to people's use of transport more generally, but also buses. They are kind of the front line of it. I know it's something that you probably get quite a lot of contact about, Susan, and it is something that we've kind of done through other bits of work. So, for example, the personal security work, I think maybe in some of the digital speaking about talking about that and for making sure there is training. I think TfL have just started rolling out some new training for bus drivers specifically. So it's a kind of, I guess, something that we've done in other strands of work, but maybe it is something we can kind of recommend to bring in. Yeah. That's a really good question.
Certainly, I think, Susan, what you've been good at sharing quite a lot of casework, which is around bad behaviour on the part of people. It's one of our most frequent complaints about behaviour on the part of drivers.
Yeah, I think you have to look beyond just the driver. So when you think about driver behaviour, it's got to be kind of more than just
that individual person, because if you think what a bus driver does when they're out on the road, and if they have abusive behaviour from one passenger or two passengers, likelihood is that they would switch off and their behaviour would become different because they have no outlet. So I think that part needs to be addressed rather than just expecting a person to be able to cope with all that. Because when we get challenges, when we're on the phone in the office, we have each other to talk to and to almost get it out of our system or let off steam or that. And a driver doesn't have that. So I think the expectations on an individual needs to be looked at more kind of holistically rather than just say you must do this.
But let's think about whether in our action planning on the back of this paper we want to say something specific about training as well, because it's definitely a live issue. Look, thank you very much. That was super helpful, and it's really this is how I want to do things. Have a discussion at the board, take away some feedback, and then bring back a revised product which shows that we've heard feedback and done something with it. So thank you very much to the people who were here last time and gave such a clear steer. Thank you so much to Trevor and to Alex for picking it up and running with it. It's really helped. So I've heard a lot in the discussion. I heard Laura very politely saying still your messages, which Laura is one of your most regularly communicated messages. I think we really make sure we really identify what the killer points are in here. There's some linkages to big transport policy issues around the governance of roads in London, around the management of road traffic demand, which I think so Michael's suggestion is that we slightly work with what we've got for now, but don't box those off because they're key issues. We've got the suggestion on thinking about what's the ask on training for the bus industry, which I think is worth having a think about. So some really good feedback from this conversation to build on the one that we had last time. So let's take that away, work this up into our kind of final product, and then in September we can all get on buses. Thank you very much. Any final thoughts? I think that was really useful.
No, just thank everyone again for their thoughts. Really useful. Got lots of notes.
All right, excellent. Okay, so the last piece we have under this portfolio agenda item was, I think particularly we wanted to share this, well, it's interesting for everybody, but particularly I think for the benefit of new board members. And Michael, let's be a bit flexible about how we handle this agenda item, because I'm super conscious that this is your presentation that I've put a paragraph onto the top of. So are you okay if I get the context? Would you be okay just running through your key messages? Would that be all right? Brilliant. Okay, so this is Michael's work, pulled together for a really good evidence session at the Assembly on the 10th of July, where the exam question was, is TfL on track to deliver against the Mayor's transport strategy? And Michael was one of a number of panelists, and he'll tell you who else was there on behalf of TravelWatch, giving evidence to the committee about the areas where things are going well, the areas where things are on track, and what we think might need to be done differently to meet the targets of the strategy. So that's the background. I think it's a very useful resource for board members to give a comprehensive picture of the strengths and weaknesses of transport delivery in London, and I hope is a good piece of grounding for some of our future conversations. Michael, would you be just walk us through your key messages, and then we'll open up the discussion.
Sure, happy to do that. And just contextual point before I do that, the Mayor's Transport Strategy, MTS for short, isn't explicitly named as one of our 8 priority work streams, but actually each one of those work streams in one way or another bites on a key aspect of the MTS. So actually, although the paper you've got in front of you was generated in response to a request to give evidence to the Assembly, actually it's a really neat way of providing the supposed big picture within which our priority work streams nestle. In terms of the session, it was the first session that the Assembly held post the election, and I made a point of welcoming the fact that the committee had decided to focus on the strategy, the big picture, as first part of its first session, and to interrogate whether or not it was heading in the right direction. The key message from me, and indeed from the three other panelists who came from London Council's Transport for All and Campaign for Better Transport, all four of us basically said the Mayor's transport strategy is not on track to deliver its headline objective. And the headline objective is to see 80% of trips in the capital by 2041 made by sustainable travel modes and or active travel modes. There's been progress in one or two aspects towards that ambition, but at the moment it's off track on at least 2/3 of the 12 headline measures which underpin that objective. Caveat to that is that we currently don't have all the information, or we didn't have at that stage, because some of the forecasting and projecting work that TfL do to indicate progress is either out of date or doesn't exist. So against the background of I think a collective view amongst the panelists, at least, that the strategy was not on track, I proposed the following. First, that the strategy itself is not a bad idea. It's not a bad thing. The headline objective is a desirable one. Oh, and by the way, there's a huge political mandate for the mayor to continue with it. So, just from a practical point of view, if you do have an issue with the strategy, that's fine. But actually, the mayor's got a political mandate to pursue it. My proposal was there are 4 things, headline things, that might be done to try and get it back on track. First, we need a clearer forward look as to what's the route map to the 2041 headline objective, because at the moment it's not clear. The second is that there needs to be a more strategic approach to public transport fares in the capital. At the moment, if you look at the mayor's manifesto at the time of the London elections in May, there are some statements about what he would like to do around fares, but it doesn't feel like it amounts to a strategic approach to making public transport fares more attractive. So that should be addressed. The third of the 4 suggestions was around buses and a big push on buses, just picking up some of the themes from the previous conversation we've had this morning. And the fourth was around, sorry, I'm miscounting. There are 2 other things. Alongside buses, the third thing was investing in significant other capital public transport projects, backed up by that longer term certainty of funding for TfL that many commentators, including ourselves, including many members of the London Assembly, have asked for. And then finally, pushing on improved accessibility to the public transport network, which essentially is around accelerating and strengthening the Healthy Streets programme that TfL currently is progressing, and which ties in with one of our 8 priority work streams, which is priority 1 around more seamless journeys. So my comments were really focused on, fleshing out what each of those kind of 4 themes, better forward look, strategy on fares, public transport projects, including buses, and pushing on better accessibility. And I think there was a lot of common thought and common cause with the other panelists on the session.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So look, the question we posed in the paper, which I recognise is fairer to existing members than new members, is twofold. One is, do you recognise the description that Michael has just run through of the sort of SWOT analysis that he's just given of where we are, where the mayor is on the transport strategy, where TfL is on the mayor's transport strategy, and in the terms of the 4 areas that Michael has set out, where we think action needs to be focused. Do we agree that these are the right actions? And if so, how can we work together to try and make sure that they're kind of progressed as well as possible? So very interested in Any reflections on either of those 2 points, recognizing that that's a fairer question for existing members? Everybody's looking happy. It was a very good piece of analysis, and super helpful. Use the right 4 things. Despite the fact that we're running behind, I'm slightly reluctant just to celebrate your work there, Michael. Laura, we will miss you. Laura has put her hand up.
I've got a volunteering problem, Fisher, that's why. Yeah, just no, Michael, I think it's excellent. I think just to reinforce really the point about the mandate is there now. So I think it's right to put the pressure on speeding up the delivery of some of the critical issues. And I also think you're right about that inspiring vision for what fairs look like in London. You know, it's going to take a long time, obviously for other parts of the country and in the context of potential nationalisation, for there to be a consistent fairs strategy across the piece, but that doesn't seem to rule out the Mayor going faster here. So I think that's the right approach. So not really a sort of question or a challenge so much as I think those 2 points are for me probably the most important.
Thank you. And I should say, notwithstanding the silence around the room and on the court, we don't claim some monopoly of wisdom on this. You know, there may be a better kind of outlook, but what I was keen to do at the session, and what I'm keen to do in our further engagement with the big players in London is at least to have a proposition. And if people have got an intelligent challenge to that and say, well, actually, look, that bit isn't actually the right way, but that's fine. But it's the basis on which you can have an intelligent conversation about what is likely to unlock improvement to travelling in the capital. So, you know, someone's got a better version of what's needed, then that's great. Let's have that discussion. It's not something that I die in a ditch over. The other thing I was going to say is that there is a strand that runs through the 4 proposed areas of action, which is the importance of getting outer London right. It's something that had been emerging strongly as a theme prior to the local elections in May. I mean, inevitably, the ULEZ expansion, which happened last August, you know, was a lightning rod for a discussion more generally about the quality of transport and policies in outer London. But actually, there is a big challenge here, and unless the kind of policies and changes that are desired happen in outer London effectively, the mayoral transport strategy headline target will not be met. So the note, if you get into the detail of it, the note actually in a number of places name check some specific things under those 4 actions that, you know, might have a particular outer London aspect. But I didn't want to leave without just referring to that, because I think it's a really important kind of intellectual pillar for whatever is done for transport policy in the capital.
Thank you. And can I just also, before we close on this item, just draw the line back to the point that Rick made under the previous item about buses, and just reflect on the fact that the things that we're proposing are all supply side interventions. So they're all things that are improving the offer, so making buses more attractive, putting in infrastructure, making the last mile more accessible. And I do think there is that hanging question that I'm not proposing we discuss now, but it is still hanging. Let's just look at it. Let's observe it about whether in aggregate a load of things to improve the supply side is going to achieve the objectives in the absence of interventions on the demand side. I think that is still hanging out there as a kind of framing question. Eddie.
I've got one question in the report. It's a really good report. Good 4 points. Can't argue against any of them at all, but I'm just wondering why we're focusing on the push on buses explicitly. Perhaps that could be a risk of other modes of transport, which all could encourage more people to use their car less.
Oh, that's a fantastic opportunity for somebody in the London TravelWatch team to explain why we love buses so much. I think Trevor should. Trevor, why is the bus the answer?
Well, the bus
Yeah.
is kind of the most accessible form of transport across London. 96% of people within 400 metres of a bus stop. It goes everywhere. More people use the bus than any other kind of mode of transport. So kind of those things. And another good thing about the network is compared to kind of the rail and the tube and things like that, it's much easier to tweak the network and extend the network. It's cost efficient, and TfL are constantly looking at in their kind of network area reviews about how to make the services better and introduce services to new areas, or even just small scale extending to hospitals and things like that. So it's kind of has a flexible resource. And the good thing about the bus is it does connect up with those other modes of transport. So to make the best, more people to try to, if it's possible to use, say trains and tubes, if you can get the buses going to those stations and make the services good to those stations, then that then encourages then people can stay local, or they can then go into London, or around other parts of London. So it's kind of that, we always just call it like the lifeblood of London, and I think it kind of is, and everything else kind of feeds around it compared to other modes, which are important, but yeah, just in kind of that kind of extensive network compared to other modes.
Fantastic answer. That's a really fantastic answer, and I completely agree with all that. And there is just the thing about buses, that they're a bit of a Cinderella mode, and if we don't shout about them and other kind of transport organizations don't, then people don't love them as much as they should. So I totally agree with Trevor there.
And also, a factoid that that I picked up is that according to TfL, 15% of those 10 million car trips in London could easily be made by bus. Now, I have no idea, what's the rigor behind that claim, but if that's true, and it kind of begs the question, well, therefore, why isn't it? Why isn't that happening now? But if that's true, that's an enormous leverage potentially through this mode.
Thank you, Tiffany. Oh, wait, Tiffany and then Rick.
Thanks, Michael. Really great paper, and I think the 4 points are very clear and to the point. I'd like to drill into the 4 points under fourth point about improving access to public transport. Yeah, overall, I agree with them. Just some questions that we don't necessarily have to answer today. The first point on the quality of streetscape. Yeah, I completely agree with that one. And it made me think of Rick's earlier point about more demand side strategies. And I was wondering if curbside management is something that's done strategically by TfL, or is it variable by local authority at the moment? Is that something that we would potentially get into to improve walking and bus journeys? And then I guess the curbside strategy also just makes me think of deliveries and how decarbonizing deliveries is also essential to achieving the MTS and increasing bus journey times, but potentially have scope for TravelWatch, or well, depending on how far we get into with supply demand side strategies. And then on the second point, the quality of major interchanges, again, agree. And I see that you've listed dockless e-bikes and taxis as examples of other connecting modes. And just a question to consider, given that sustainability is such a key part of the mayor's transport strategy, do we want to very explicitly steer towards sustainable modes of transport, which would be buses, to overground, just the whole public transport network, and kind of discourage taxis, Ubers, all of that? Or do we acknowledge that? Well, I also don't know what the data shows in terms of public transport to taxi interchanges versus public transport, different modes. So yeah, that's the second point. Third one on road safety. Yeah, the potential for focus on work-related road accidents made me think of all of the gig economy workers like Uber Eats, Deliveroo, all of those motorcycle drivers and e-bike riders who can ride quite dangerously because of the pressures of their job. And TfL and the GLA do not have any data collection on road safety for gig economy workers or any sense of the numbers of gig economy workers and the proportion of gig economy workers as a total of all road users at a given time. So is that an area that we would want to push them in terms of how to improve road safety, because it has implications for obviously the workers, but everyone else who's on the road or trying to walk or take the bus. And then the last point on disabled access, yeah, that builds on a lot of the work that we've been doing already. And just as a challenge, would we consider broadening the scope to include caregivers and care-related journeys? Because I think the London Assembly is interested in doing a deeper interrogation of the assumptions that go into route planning for the transport network, and how there's so much focus on typical journey to work and not about people who make care-related journeys or leisure journeys or anything else beyond commute to work.
Really rich points there. Let's hear from Rick, and then I'm going to give Michael a chance to come back. Although some of that stuff may be stuff to take away and digest in the next stage of the work, and others are things you want to come back on right now. But Rick first.
It was just one point which Michael raised as well about out of London. So
Yeah.
I remember making similar points when I was at Campaign for Transport more than 10 years ago about how out of London is left out or was not prioritised to the same extent. And I was running an extent to it, but there might be opportunities going forward with kind of rail reform as well, because the big difference between TfL stations and franchise stations is the the quality of how they're looked after and the interaction of the wider streetscape to change the public transport. So there might be opportunities there. And I guess maybe with TfL not having to worry so much about the pressures on the central London public transport, if people are still not returning to work for quite as much as they were pre-pandemic, there might also be less pressure on having to have capital investment going into central London stations. It might also provide more opportunities to something around as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of threads on all pointing towards out of London as a focus of activity. So Michael, there's an awful lot in there. So quality of streetscape, whether we should be taking more of a position on non-sustainable modes, a particular focus for work on work-related road safety, and then on carer access as well as disabled access. And I think very much the GLA, when we saw the Labour group, they were very interested in understanding journey purpose in a much richer way. So that's definitely, we heard that too. I mean, Michael, are things that you want to come back on, or do you want to just absorb and take a seat of some of those points?
So a kind of immediate reflection is, if I just take that, Rick, thank you for the points about out of London. If I pick up Tiffany's points mainly around that fourth area, which is around first last mile journeys, essentially, that there's obviously a resonance with priority one in our work stream. I think base camp is we need to have a London TravelWatch view about what does the world of first last mile journeys look like at the moment in overall terms. What are the key elements of it? And some of the things that are in the MTS session note kind of unpack some of those elements. But base camp is, what does the overall picture look like? The next stage, and I'm starting to think now about next year's work program, is if you look at that overall picture, where is it that we might be able to add value? My proposition would be, we can't and we shouldn't try and boil the ocean. We need to be very targeted in where we can, help provide insight, stroke ideas about what needs to be done. I think some of that prioritization just happens naturally. So, for example, curbside deliveries, cargo freight isn't in our remit. I wouldn't go there. That's an easy one to knock on the head, but others perhaps are more naturally our areas. But the second observation that I would make is that wherever it is that we might say, actually, there is something really useful to be done here, the opportunity for us to partner and to ally with other players to help push forward those debates is one that we really need to mind. So, for example, if I think of the streetscape and just really simple terms, street clutter, which is an issue for both the able-bodied and the non-able-bodied in using pavements to walk or to wheel. Rick may say, I'm on a hiding to nothing here, but partnering with someone like Living Streets, or Tiffany, you might say partnering up with Sustrans. These are the opportunities for us to make things happen without necessarily having to do all the legwork. So the summary is, I think we're already starting to work on this space, but it's about making the overall picture clear. Second is, we need to prioritize, and we need to be pretty ruthless in prioritizing. And thirdly, there are other people we can work with where it is that we can't do the work ourselves.
Really good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. So listen, having been a bit anxious at the beginning of this item and nobody was saying anything, I let it run for a bit. Actually, it turned into a really rich conversation. So thank you. Thank you very much for your input. It's a lot to think about. But thanks particularly to Michael for a very helpful piece of analysis, which I think is a very good product for the board to have helped us understand what's going on and have some really good thinking about what we do next. So thank you. Okay, so we will, just in case anybody was fretting, we will still finish at 1. Because I think the rest of what we've got to do, we can crack through relatively hastily. But we need to let's give ourselves a proper slug of time to consider Susan's really rich casework report. And over to you, Susan.
Thank you. So what I would usually do is just take the report as read, but because we have new members here today, I thought I would just kind of give a little run through of what you're actually looking at. So this report is done on a quarterly basis, and it's also provided to Transport Focus. It's the same report goes to both organisations because it's casework and it's easier for me, really. So the first thing we will look at is what's coming in, and we're a reactive organisation, so we're reacting to what's coming in. We're not driving things to appeals to come into us. So the first graph is just a comparison, and then the second graph is what we've seen over the quarter since 2020. So broadcasting casework is possible. I mean, if we look at what happened last Friday with the IT outage, there's absolutely no way I could have forecasted that was going to happen. And we actually don't know what we will see of that yet. So it will be between about 4 and 6 weeks by the time we will see if there's anything coming to us following that. So we'll react to it as it comes in. I usually give a brief update if there's anything to say within the casework. It's other, where it doesn't really fit anywhere else. There's been quite a large part of our Transport Focus work is to do with penalty fares and revenue protection. The penalty fare increased to £100 plus the fare last year, and that's really driven up the amount of contact we get. London TravelWatch and Transport Focus are not official penalty fare appeals bodies. We will try and help people, but we don't have any authority to overturn or uphold penalty fares or prosecutions or ticket irregularity reports. But we'll try and help individuals who come to us especially where we see that there is an individual factor to their particular circumstances. You will note that the single justice procedure that is used by some rail operators and by TfL it's almost like a private prosecution. That's went to is being investigated to see if it was an actual lawful way of doing it. I think it's been fairly determined that it's not lawful, but the decision won't come out, I think, until the middle of August about how that will be resolved. But the couple of the railway organisations, which were Northern and Greater Anglia, have pretty much agreed that it's not great. So although the initial thoughts that it would affect hundreds of thousands of passengers, it now affects tens of thousands, which is still awful, but not as bad as we'd originally thought. Then give an update on Eurostar. At the moment, there is no real update on Eurostar. I think that we'll face more issues as we get closer to the machines that are being installed at St Pancras, that will have to do fingerprinting and corneal retina screening for people to travel into Europe. That starts on the 6th of October. And then the visa program that will also need to happen will come online next year. And it's a bit like the ESTA you have when if you go into the United States, it's going to be very similar. We've had some more contact about Dial-A-Ride in the last, probably the last 6 months, which is very unsurprising. More users are coming back to Dial-A-Ride. Dial-A-Ride do have an issue with staff. We were talking about problems with staff on the railway, just across the transport sector at the moment. TfL do have a mentoring group that they try and help passengers who may use Dial-A-Ride but may be able to use the bus or the tube, and they will go out with them to increase their confidence of being able to use other modes and not only rely on the Dial-A-Ride provision, which then just opens up their scope to travel and move around more. Our performance is, as far as the casework team is fine. Since the Rail Ombudsman came in 2018, our casework is a lot more complicated with challenging policy rather than having the backup of the terms and conditions that are in favour of the passenger. Usually our sort of casework now is where we're saying, yes, that might be the policy, but we think in this particular circumstance, and we're challenging it on that basis. So our casework, our cases are generally open longer than they used to be, whilst we have those kinds of negotiations with the industry. And it's much more important that we stay with the passenger and try and provide them with a satisfactory outcome rather than worry about closing a case within a certain time frame. As long as we maintain contact, obviously, with the passenger at all time. One thing we will notice in the Q2's report is we're changing the way we're classifying whether we've had a good outcome or an unsuccessful outcome. So we've changed a lot of the classifications because, again, our classifications were based in prior to 2018. They don't really provide any helpful insight to both the board, the London TravelWatch board, and the Transport Focus Passenger Contact Group. So we're changing that up a little bit, so it'll just give more information. We use the word neutral a lot at the moment, and it's almost impossible to explain what that is. When you're actually working in casework, it's very easy, but outside it's difficult. So we're thinking, no, we need something that's more relevant to what we're doing now. So the next chart on page 6 is what we resolve rather than what's come in. And if the numbers of what's coming in go down, the numbers of what we resolve go up because we have more time to deal with it. And that's just kind of speaks for itself. And then we have trackers, and these are usually the top 4. The bottom one may slip in and out, but these are usually the top 4 of the type of complaints we receive. Fair retailing and refunds is a real catch-all category because it could mean for almost every single appeal that we receive, that could be the catch-all. But the categories we use are the same as the industry, and when we report to the ORR, it's their categories as well. So it would be, we could change ours, but then we would have to have some kind of reporting purposes to report into them. So the initial sort of inquiries are dealt with by our outsourced providers. As I said, the new provider, they came online with us in April. And They're doing quite well at the moment. The team who work on our contract are really interested in it. So that's kind of off the battle always with an outsourced provider. I work very closely with the Rail Ombudsman, so I'm the vice chair of their consumer panel. And we also have meetings regarding collaboration, so we can share insight on what's going on in the industry. And then we also have the root cause analysis group, which I'm working with regarding passenger assist on railways and eventually across London. At the moment, that picture is not looking pretty at all, but I'll be reporting on that at a later time. Our numbers are down in Q1, and so was the Rail Ombudsman, and so was the industry until last Friday, where they just jumped up by, I think GTR said 4,000 in one day,
Okay.
4,000 claims in one day. So yeah, we'll wait and see what happens. But it doesn't always follow, because when the ULEZ boundary increased, you'd think we would see a lot of that. We didn't see any. Because of obviously, if you've driven into the ULEZ boundary, then you're going to get charged, and appealing to us isn't going to change that at all. So it actually made quite good sense. And then we do a satisfaction survey. We changed that as we changed the outsourced provider. Priya was really helpful with that. So we just wanted to ask questions where we might get a little bit more insight, and it has really worked. We've also changed the way we handle our complaints, and that has provided more satisfaction for passengers, even if we can't help them, which was what we were really looking for. And we've had a few 100% scores, which was great to see. And then we always put in the feedback as well, because I think it's important that we see not only just the graphs, but to see what people actually do say to us via the passenger survey. I was just saying, Priya, that you're really helpful to me by doing the, you missed your moment. So that's and it will look like this probably almost all the time, unless there's something, you know, I have to actually explain that's different, it's happened, that unexpected. Is there any questions anybody has?
So there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there, Susan. I'm actually slightly wondering, I mean, we can pick up any immediate questions now, whether it would be worth, I think, especially for new board members, maybe arranging a dedicated 30-minute briefing on caseworking as a topic, because it is such an important part of what we do. And it's such an important, you know, point of contact with the actual user, and a way of learning about what's going well and what's not. So let's pick up any immediate comments, questions now, but if people would like it, I think a 30-minute teach-in on how we do casework at some point would be a sensible thing to do. Would that be of interest? Yeah. Any immediate questions or comments though on Susan's excellent report?
Quick question from me, because I've forgotten, Susan. The comments at the end, are they a selection of the comments received during the quarter, or are they all of the comments received during the quarter?
They were all of them, because we did start the surveys again till June.
Yeah.
Found ever a couple of months to kind of bed in before I hit them with doing the surveys as well. So yeah, it's very low numbers because it was only for 1 month.
Yeah, but we're not having a bit of selection bias, because they're lovely. They're really nice. Eddie.
Yes.
Yeah, really great report. Very interesting. Thank you. A couple of questions. You haven't got responsibility for cases around injury, but what if somebody does fall under your remit, which involves an injury? Do you pass the whole case on, or do you deal with your part and then send the case on to a person who's presumably going to deal with the injury? The second bit is about the comments. There was a faulty product. What was the faulty product?
Let me deal with your question first. So an injury claim, when a passenger has an injury, they normally want financial compensation, and that has to get passed to the transport operators insurance, we would have nothing to do with that because it's quite an expert field. And my concern would be if we got involved, it would actually make things worse because we don't know what we're doing. But if a passenger comes to us and says they've had an injury and they've not had a response about it, then we could try to facilitate that for them, because what should happen is they should be provided with the insurance details. And your second question was about a product not working.
It says it's one of the verbatim quotes says, "I am extremely unsatisfied with the outcome I received after 18 months ordering a faulty product and delays in incubating myself."
From what I can recall about this, I think it's a smart card for railways, and it's not working.
Right.
But our concern would be that if a passenger bought a ticket in a different way, or they could buy a ticket in a different way, that they weren't financially disadvantaged. So if they did have to buy a paper ticket while this was being resolved, was that paper ticket more expensive? If it was, then we would have a lot to say about that, but that's what we made sure. So the passenger wasn't at a financial disadvantage by having to use a different ticketing option.
Well remembered. Thank you. That was a hard question on an individual comment. Okay, look, thank you very much. Really helpful report. I always really enjoy particularly reading the feedback from users where we've helped them. Such important work. And let's just pick up that action of setting up a dedicated briefing on Casework Report. Okay, I think that takes us back to Alex. We've covered quite a lot of your world already this morning, Alex, so just by exception.
Yeah. So yeah, probably be quite a short one from me. I will be happy to hear. So taking the paper as read, the only things to add to it from myself, one is that at the end of last month, Chiltern rolled out pay-as-you-go to a few more of their stations in their patch, so people can use contactless card, not Oyster card, but contactless card to go to 6 additional stations. And this is part of Department for Transport's kind of wider project to expand pay-as-you-go payment to more stations in the southeast. And we've had initial conversations with them basically about how it's going, what's gone well, what's not gone so well, with the aim that ahead of the next rollout of stations, which should be around autumn, kind of taking those learnings, can other train companies build on them so that those issues don't, if there are issues, don't happen again, although it seems like it's gone quite well, which is always positive. The other thing I'll briefly mention is that under Work with Transport Committee, Trisha and myself met with a couple of Labour Assembly members, including a new Assembly member a week ago. Yeah,
It's felt like a long time.
Kind of introducing ourselves to them and what we do and how we might work together. And I thought it was a really positive meeting. Trisha, I don't have any actual thoughts, but yeah, I think shows kind of the strength of hopefully our relationship with the Assembly and Assembly members, and I think lots of potential for working with them in future. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any wider questions or anything.
No, I think that's a really good summary. It's a really helpful report. I think with the Assembly, it is very much in our interest. We have our independent work programme on our voice, but it would just be daft if they were doing work on a priority and we were doing work on a priority and we didn't see how the whole could be more than some of its parts. And I think that it's a real tribute to the work that Arthur, my predecessor, and Michael and the whole team did to get us closer, and with all the board members' support, to get us closer to the Assembly. That feels like a established way of doing business now, where I don't think it was a couple of years ago. So good work, everybody. Any questions for Alex on her report? Yes, please.
Yeah, just one quick one about the Bus Alliance meetings. How representative are those meetings? How many people come to them?
Very good question. How many people come to them is very variable, we'll be honest. So some meetings, and the most recent one was very well attended, so probably had about a dozen organisations there. And we generally kind of also get, so I mentioned a few Assembly members or their staff will come along, and that's generally cross-party. And it's a good range of organisations. So there are some that are specific around the bus, some which are kind of wider transport but kind of represent specific demographics, and also some that kind of look at it in conjunction with other modes. So active travel was the one that came up earlier, kind of again because obviously it's one network really. So there is a good spread. I think it can obviously depend on what's going on at the moment. There was a bit of a dip during the pre-election period just because other commitments, politics and all that. But yeah, I think hopefully now that all the various elections are out of the way, we can kind of push on and build on that. And it's also an open invitation, kind of anyone who is interested in coming can come along.
Thanks very much. Luke. Oh, sorry, Laura, your hand. Yeah.
Thanks, Tricia. Just a quick question. Well, it's not really a question, sorry, Alex. It's kind of an observation for new members about our role in the safety stuff. So I noticed your reference to pacts in the report, really helpful. I just wondered if it was worth you saying 10 seconds on what we do there, because I know we've had different kind of levels of engagement before, and I just wondered if it might be quite helpful just to pause on that for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, I might ask Michael to jump in a minute as well, because there's a semi-agreement, or there was previously an agreement with Transport Focus around safety. So in this instance, when we talk about safety, it's kind of the infrastructure or physical safety as opposed to kind of the personal security work. So we are a member and go along to PAC, so Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, Rail Safety Working Group, RSC. Bit of
That's a big acronym. That.
Yeah. And that's kind of as a member, kind of provide a consumer viewpoint, sometimes go on behalf of Transport Focus as well, though they often send someone as well, but it's fairly light touch. I think as an organisation, we don't have sort of the technical expertise around safety on, sort of some of the actual running of the infrastructure. But, again, just always bring it back to the passenger where we can. Michael, I don't know if there's any sort of thing around historically that it's worth noting or might not be.
Yeah, so very, very briefly, I think in the dim and distant past, before you and I worked in the organisation, there would have been resource in the team to kind of focus on safety issues, and that is no longer the case. But in the more recent past, Arthur kind of had an informal watching brief on any safety issues, both on our behalf, but also in his role as a Transport Focus board member on Transport Focus's behalf as well. I reviewed it recently with Transport Focus, and we felt that it was a bit of a vague arrangement, and so to bring some clarity to it, we decided we weren't going to carry on expecting now Tricia to carry out a watching brief as a non-executive member, but the team would keep an eye on things, and if there was ever an issue on which we needed to kind of dedicate some time and effort, we would then, through our budget, we would commission some outside resource to help, facilitate that work beyond the kind of business as usual type work. So occasionally we might contribute, as we did via Trevor's Good Services. We contributed to the RAIB inquiry into the Clapham tube fire incident, I think, briefly. So it's all very light touch, but hopefully a little bit clearer in terms of our arrangements at Transport Focus and how we resource this area. Final point on pacts. They are very interested in this issue about work-related road safety issues in the capital. And I've ended up connecting pacts with TfL, and we've got a tripartite meeting coming up to see whether this is something which is worth us pursuing in some way. But, hold that thought for the moment.
Yeah, that was super helpful, Laura. Thank you. It's a really good example of an area where understanding the landscape and who is the best person to lead on particular things is really important. Thank you. Okay, great. Should we move on to Luke in the corner? Yeah. No, it's yeah. Come on, sit at the table. Yeah. Luke gets extra credit putting a photograph of me into his report.
So yes, not the last slide report or this one. Big factor was pre-election period that we mentioned. The general election sort of went from one pre-election period assembly elections to general elections. So basically, in the lockdown for most of it, it turned out most media. So again, we've got inquiries coming through, but we sort of sense so not too much coverage since last book meeting, but with some external events stuff, so just went to and Michael really did a part with me in the London Assembly last week before completely track, but that won't went down well. Also coverage on social. Apart from that, another thing that's not usually in the report is annual reviews, the yearly annual reviews. So that would now sort of stakeholders published online, but that's got our sort of issues in media. That's the last week. So yeah, that was a bit of a back and forth. And I can't remember any version of the or not, but I'm not sure it's double digits in the end one. And yeah, I think that's it. In that range, it's for social again, we're very quiet. But I suppose the shining light is the website traffic continues to be up year on year. It's with us again being very quiet, so that was quite nice to see that pictures. And with that again, it's like major things. Earlier in the year, it's like strikes every month. Now, doing this by pages, which would be a lot of traffic. And that last couple of months, we haven't really put any media statements out, so but again, the traffic needs to go up. So it's beautiful. That is pretty, almost brilliant.
Well, sure, but it was the election period. We couldn't be controversial. I think it's fine. Thank you, Luca. Thank you for everything that you're doing in the continuing absence for head of communications. It's just really impressive. Thank you. I mean, for the benefit of new joiners, I think one piece of context that might be helpful to understand is a load of people find out about London TravelWatch during the ticket offices issue last year. We created a huge community of people that knew who we were and wanted to work with us. And I think one of the strategic challenges is to make sure that we keep that relationship going. So it's so that we're continuing to work with those people, but for other purposes. That's a big deal. Any quick questions or comments on Luke's report? Yes.
Yes, but it's about the annual review. I was just wondering, do we have any demand at all for alternative formats for that report? I'm not suggesting producing it just for the sake of it, but are we producing an easy read version, for example?
We're not. We did it all so basically I decided did it on super cheap. And we haven't had the restful best part one so you look into it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for everything you're doing, Luke. Brilliant. I see that Shahid has joined us. Hello, Shahid. Welcome. Finance update.
Hello.
So
Hi.
you're explaining just for the benefit of new joiners. So Shahid, we have two designate but not properly appointed board members with us this morning. So Eddie and Rick. And we did explain a bit earlier on about the relationship with Transport Focus on corporate functions. So you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you. Nice to meet you all. Okay, so it's not a lot to report on this report. There's two main things I want to highlight. Is one, we have a vacancy on the staffing side. That's the head of communications post. So we are showing a variance year to date. We will reprofile that as we get a more firm start date. And the other thing just to note is the project part currently stands at 125,000, which are just sort of finalising how that's going to be allocated, and that will be updated in the coming months. Other than that, we're largely on track with where we're anticipating, and we anticipate it to be sort of within target for the year as well.
Thank you very much. It's never a very interesting finance report at this point in the year. Sorry, I don't mean that sounds a bit greedy. I don't mean that. But between now and next month, some of the things of which we don't have clarity in this report will be clearer, including start date for the new head of comms, including board member appointments, including some of the clarity on project spend. So this is a little bit of a holding position with some questions still outstanding for the next one. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Indeed, yes, exactly.
Great. Michael.
Yeah, apologies on the project spend and dividing up between our priority themes. The work internally has been done, but unfortunately the lurgy struck me before I could convert the conversation with Alex that I'd had into a note to get to you. So we've done that, and it'll be with you probably by the end of the week. For the benefit of board members across the 8 priority themes, probably the biggest allocations of our very very constrained projects budget would go to projects 4, 5, and 8. So those are on better public transport services, inclusion, and better insight. But there'll be a more specific breakdown of how we intend to share the cake out by the time you get the next financial report.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, unless I'm not seeing any other hands or questions, thank you very much for your continued support. Let's just note your report for now. Great. So let's welcome Lara. Welcome to our virtual room. You catch us at a point of exhaustion because we've been working incredibly hard this morning. It's really great that you were able to join us, even just for a little bit at the end of our meeting. So we actually have one last agenda item to deal with, which is a relatively quick one, which is an update of our stakeholder work. So Lara, what I'm going to suggest we do is that we do that Alex gives us the update on the stakeholder work. And then after that, just give you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, say hello, and then we'll see how we feel after that. Does that make sense? Great. Okay, lovely. Alex, stakeholder work.
Great. So this is following a meeting 2-3 meetings ago. We did some initial stakeholder mapping and presented to the board and had some really helpful thoughts. So thank you again for that. I've made a few updates. I'm just conscious of time, so it was whiz through it and based on sort of feedback from the board last time about where to focus our efforts, who we kind of want to shift the dial on, and how. So top lines from each one, political stakeholders. Obviously a lot has happened since the last time we met. Everything is still a little bit in flux. We are starting mapping the new London MPs, who I think particularly of interest to us. I think there are some existing relationships amongst new MPs. So, for example, Deidre Costigan, who I think actually spoke at a previous board meeting, has been elected as an MP. So that's a potential kind of avenue and other sort of examples like that. It would be good to build up those links because I think MPs is an area that we've traditionally had a bit less contact with, and also the new ministers once that's settled. We have met with Lord Hendy a few times before. Although interestingly about buses, no, he's rail minister, but hopefully that relationship will continue. And then also again, select committees and APGs, they're all still to be appointed and confirmed, so that will come a little bit further down the line. In terms of industry, the main thing that came out of, or one of the main things that came out of the last time we discussed this was having kind of more strengthened relationship with TfL chief officers, kind of at that higher level. So we've had a wider conversation with TfL's engagement team about how we work with them, but as part of that, setting up a series of annual quarterly meetings between Michael and different TfL chief officers, some more regularly than others, depending how relevant they are to our work. So that is kicking off, and then also the other side of that is around talks and building that relationship, particularly with the ones who have a lot of stations and a lot of services in our area. So the big ones are South Eastern, SWR, and GTR. So we're going to kind of reintroduce the semi-regular meetings that we used to have at a chief exec level, but also on a more working level. We've assigned each talk to a London TravelWatch stakeholder lead to kind of carry on the day-to-day business, build relationships, and I guess kind of monitor performance and that side of things. And that's again building on from the ticket office consultations last year, which again I think did in a way really help improve our relationships and engagement with talks, just by virtue of having a lot of conversations with them. And then finally on the advocacy stakeholder side, and this comes to some of the points Eddie mentioned earlier. I think one of the big things that came out of this conversation was basically, are we talking to the right people? Have we got the right contacts? And kind of mapping that, not just one big advocacy stakeholders, but across different topics, different issues. So we covered all the areas that we're working on. So we've been doing that and updating our contact database as well to make sure that we're talking to the right people, and trying to reach out through things like the Bus Alliance, again, to build that. And I think that is going well, but probably the area where we could put a bit more focus on as well. At the moment, it's often been, oh, we're doing something on personal security, so we'll review this area now, but I guess we could be a little bit more proactive with that. Very quick whistle stop tour. But any thoughts? Is this still the right approach? Are there any gaps or anything? Very welcome. And also happy to pick it up after it as well.
Good work. Thank you. Thank you. And nicely briskly marched through. So I mean, I think what we've done and what we've not done on this piece of work. So as Alex rightly walked through, the diagnostic that's shared in the room has been refined following the discussion we had in the last board. So some of you said to us, you're missing people, or this is more important than you think it is, or you really need to be giving attention. So what you've got is a really good updated sense of what's the landscape that we're operating in here. And as Alex said, some of it's still in flux post-election, but some of it has been refined. I think the next bit, and this is the bit where we really need your help, is the action planning bit. And I think my reflection from the last discussion, Laura, I think it was you, who were really encouraging us not just to look at it, but to think, how can individual board members and executive members bring their relationships to the table and say, who on this stakeholder map can I help you work with? And I think that's, having done the updating piece and evolved it to this stage, I think that's the next bit of the conversation, is to put a bit of, sorry, Laura, if I've anticipated your comment before you even made it, but that was what you told us to do last time. And I think that's the bit that we still need to put on. So any offer, either in the room or separately, any relationships, particularly red or amber relationships, that you can help us improve, offers gratefully received. Any suggestions for ways in which this analysis still doesn't quite capture the people you think we should worry about, also gratefully received. Over to you. Everybody happy? Do you want to come back to us separately with people you know? That would be super helpful. Lara. Hello.
Hi, just check, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think just from my perspective, Age UK London is definitely a stakeholder that I've got good relationships with. I'm chair of a local Age UK in Wandsworth and have been for a number of years, and regularly in touch with their chair and chief executive. So
perfect. Welcome. Excellent first intervention. Like that. All right, great. Well, I think let's take that one and bank it. Anybody else who, having had a look at it, thinks I could help with this, let us know. And the next time we come back to stakeholder mapping, let's talk about let's get a little bit more detail about how we think it's going and what the action planning is about. Thank you. Excellent. Right. So kind of Lara, I don't. So we're in a room in Borough High Street, some of us, where I don't want to be mean, but there were free pastries at 9:30 this morning. But what we have in the room is the London TravelWatch sort of executive team, and the two other new board members who are hopefully joining with you. So we have Eddie and Rick here as well, and we have existing board member Priya's in the room, Tiffany's in the room, and then Susan's online, and Laura, who's an outgoing board member, is also online as well. So I think we're not gonna go around and tell you our life stories, but we would just like to hear from you. So just because it's just great to have you as part of this meeting for a short period of time. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to the people that are in the room, that would be just fantastic.
yeah, of course, happy to. So lovely to meet all of you, and those of you I can see in the room. Apologies, I wasn't able to join this class with another board meeting, which just ended. So I'm a Londoner, born in Fulham, currently live in Wandsworth, spent my whole life living in London and traveling in London. I'm really excited to be joining the board, because when I saw the role, I thought actually this is a really great opportunity for me to be involved in helping to kind of shape the way that people travel and how, you know, travel services are organised in London. And I think hopefully some of my background will help with that. So my background is working in the NHS and health policy and strategy for a number of years at NHS England. I'm now sort of working as a consultant currently at a local authority, and I wasn't sure if I spotted local authorities on that stakeholder map, but I think there might be a little bit of a gap there on that one. I also have quite a lot of experience in the voluntary sector. So as I said, I'm chair of an aged care in Wandsworth, and definitely have been involved in kind of thinking about how we support older people around using travel services, around things like digital inclusion and digital first strategies. So I thought that was something I could add value on as well. In addition, you know, I'm a Black woman, and I think it's really interesting sort of having come from sort of growing up in London, how different it is. My family didn't have a car. We always used public transport to get everywhere and to get about, and it was really kind of critical to being able to function. So I'm hoping I can bring some of that aspect of kind of my own lived experience to the role as well. And yeah, also I have a kind of a sort of science and research and analysis background. So Trisha and I were talking last week about some of the data, and I'm really excited to get into some of the data and evidence that we use, and how we can use that as best we can to kind of influence what's happening. So I don't know, I hope is that sufficient?
Yeah, welcome. Lovely. It's really lovely.
Thank you.
Able to take the time to join us even briefly. So great to have you in the room. But we are coming up towards the end now of the meeting. So I'm going to have one last week. We circulated the risk register, but that was we weren't proposing to discuss that today. We just made a few updates. We'll come back to that in a future meeting. So before we do the kind of closing ceremony, you can tell the Olympics coming up. Is there anything else that anybody wants to cover, or you think we've missed? Okay, so look, we've just been doing some hellos, and can I first say a huge thank you to our board members designate for taking the time to join us this morning, even though we haven't heard you yet. So that's been lovely, and I've been really delighted that you haven't been observers at all. You've been full participants. It's made the discussion really rich. So thank you. But we've got a couple of farewells as well. So I'm going to start with Eloise, although it would like to do her head in. She knew she thought I would make a speech about her, but so I won't, because there will be lots of speeches. But the thing I will say about Eloise is, if I was ever in any difficult spot, and if there were a room full of people and I had to choose one to be in it with me, Eloise would always be the person I would choose. She's that person, right? She's that person, and she's been just terrific to work with, and I'm very glad that she's following her dream. But we will miss you tremendously. So Eloise, thank you for all you've done for the board. And then Laura, you've been so kind. I just want to call out your kindness, because I think that's been one of your characteristics that I've seen as a board member. I think we've already seen today, new board members and existing ones, that you're proactive and supportive and always ask a really incisive question. And we will miss the ties that you've given us to your kind of business background and that understanding that you've given about all different kinds of transport users. But we are really grateful to you, and we will hopefully see you in Take the Bus Week in September, and we'll try and find an opportunity. I think several of the new members have been keen to have a social moment as well, so let's have a joiners and leavers moment, and hopefully we can get you and Karen and some of the new members all in a room together where we can celebrate everything that you've delivered and supported for the organisation. So thank you very much, Laura, as well. So I think we should applaud Eloise and Laura before we go.
Thank you. That's very kind. And yeah, I would love to do that. It's been a real privilege to be on the board. So that would be great. Thanks.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Have a really good afternoon. Take care, all.